You were told, at some point, to be realistic, to grow up, lower your expectations, stop tilting at things you cannot change. The dream job, the great novel, the cause you would give your life to, the person you were sure was the one. Someone leaned in with the kindest possible face and told you it was a windmill, not a giant, not worth the charge. And a quiet part of you believed them, folded the dream up small, and got on with a sensible life that pays the bills and slowly, invisibly, starves. That ache has a patron saint, and he is a skinny old man in rusted armor on a broken-down horse, 400 years old and still riding. Everyone files Don Quixote under comedy, a lunatic who thinks windmills are giants and sheep are armies, a punchline in a suit of tin. But strip away the slapstick and you find one of the most piercing books ever written about the war inside every human being. The war between the world as it actually is, grey and practical and disenchanting, and the world as we desperately wish it were, charged with meaning and worth dying for. Cervantes gives that war two bodies and sets them on one road. A mad knight who sees giants everywhere, and a plain farmer beside him who only ever sees windmills. The genius and the heartbreak is that the book refuses to tell you which one is right. This is Don Quixote in about 20 minutes, and by the end you may not be sure anymore whether the same thing to do is to put the lance down or pick it up. The book is The Ingenious Gentleman Don Quixote of La Mancha, published in 2 parts in 1605 and 1615 by Miguel de Cervantes, a Spaniard whose own life reads like an adventure novel he was too modest to write about himself. He was a soldier, wounded at the great sea battle of Lepanto, where he lost the use of his left hand for the rest of his days. On the voyage home, he was captured by pirates and spent 5 years as a slave in Algiers, attempting escape after escape. He came home to poverty, worked as a tax collector, was thrown in prison over the accounts, and it may have been there, with nothing, that an old man began dreaming up another old man who had nothing but a head full of stories. Cervantes set out to write a joke, a parody of the chivalric romances that were the pulp fiction of his age, those endless tales of flawless knights that everyone devoured and no one quite took seriously. He meant to mock them. Instead, he accidentally invented the modern novel and wrote what many still call the greatest ever set down. 4 centuries later, the parody is a footnote and the book is immortal, because Cervantes stumbled onto something far larger than satire. He found the permanent human comedy, a person who decides the disenchanted world is simply not good enough and refuses to live in it. That refusal is why the book survives. Every generation feels the same itch, and every generation recognizes the old knight in the mirror. Here is the whole book in one sentence. Don Quixote is the story of an aging, gentle country gentleman who reads so many tales of knights that he loses his grip on reality, reinvents himself as a heroic knight-errant, and rides out into a flat, ordinary Spain to right wrongs and win a glory that exists mostly inside his own shining head. That is the engine of it. Not a man against the world exactly, a man against the ordinariness of the world, insisting on meaning in a landscape that offers him only dust, inns and windmills. And walking beside him the whole way is Sancho Panza, his squire, a short, round, illiterate farmer who is everything the knight is not. Practical, earthbound, hungry, and gloriously sane. The two of them, the dreamer who sees only giants and the realist who sees only windmills, are the two halves of you arguing all the way down the road. Why does it matter? Because you make this exact choice every single day between the life your circumstances hand you and the life your imagination insists on. We will walk it in 5 beats. First, how a quiet man reads himself into madness. Second, how he invents a lady to make the whole quest mean something. Third, the windmills, the most famous 4 minutes in all of literature. Fourth, the words that hold his entire defiant soul together. And fifth, the ending nobody expects, where reason comes back and it does not feel like a victory at all. We will read Cervantes' own words along the way, checked against the public domain translation, because the tenderness of this book lives in its language. First beat, how a man reads himself out of his own mind. Before he is Don Quixote, he is Alonso Quixano, a middle-aged gentleman in a dusty village of La Mancha with a modest income, a housekeeper, a niece, and far too much time. And he has a habit that curdles into an obsession. He reads. Specifically, he devours the chivalric romances of his day, those wild bestsellers about knights slaying giants and rescuing maidens, and he cannot stop. Cervantes describes the ruin with a doctor's precision and a comedian's timing. From sunset to sunrise and dawn to dark, he pores over them, and what with little sleep and much reading, his brains got so dry that he lost his wits. Sit with that image because it is startlingly modern. A man consumes so much of one kind of story, so relentlessly, that the story eats the man. The line between the fiction he loves and the life he is actually living dissolves, and he decides, with total sincerity, to become a knight-errant himself, to polish up his great-grandfather's rusted armor, rename his bony old horse Rocinante, and ride out to revive an age of heroes that never really existed. We laugh, and then we look at our own screens. We too marinate for hours a day in curated stories about how life should look, who we should be, what we should want. Feeds engineered to dry the brain and inflame the longing. Quixote is not a warning about books. He is a mirror held up to anyone who has let a fantasy of the world quietly overwrite the world in front of them. The stories we soak in become the eyes we end up seeing with. Second beat, the lady he invents to make it all mean something. A knight, Quixote knows from his books, cannot ride out alone. He needs a cause, a name to fight under, a love to consecrate every deed. Cervantes puts it exactly. A knight-errant without love was like a tree without leaves or fruit, or a body without a soul. So the old man goes looking for a lady to adore. And here is the detail that breaks your heart and gives away the whole game. There is no princess. There is a sturdy farm girl in a nearby village, a good hand at salting pork, a woman he has seen perhaps a handful of times and who has no idea he exists. He crowns her in his mind Dulcinea del Toboso, the peerless queen of his heart, the most beautiful woman in the world, and he swears every victory to her name. The object is utterly ordinary, the devotion is total, and that is not a flaw in his madness. It is the secret engine of nearly every meaningful life. We do the same thing, all of us. We take something perfectly ordinary, a job, a person, a hometown, a craft, and we pour into it a significance it did not arrive with, and in the pouring we make it real, make it worth our years. The cynic says Dulcinea is a delusion, just a peasant girl. The knight says she is the reason he can get up and face the road. Ask yourself which one is living a life you would actually want. Meaning is rarely found lying around ready-made. Far more often, like Dulcinea, it has to be crowned. Third beat, the Windmills. The 4 most famous minutes in the history of the novel. Riding across the plain, Quixote and Sancho come upon 30 or 40 windmills, their great sails turning in the wind, and the knight's dream-soaked eyes transform them on sight. He turns to his squire, electric with purpose, and cries out, "For look there, friend Sancho Panza, where 30 or more monstrous giants present themselves, all of whom I mean to engage in battle and slay." Sancho squints and says, as gently as he can, that those are windmills, and what look like arms are only the sails. And here is the exchange that has echoed for 4 centuries. Quixote will not have it. "Those are giants," he insists. "Those are giants, and if thou art afraid, away with thee out of this, and betake thyself to prayer while I engage them in fierce and unequal combat." Then he spurs poor Rocinante forward, lance down, and charges. A sail catches the lance, hoists horse and rider into the air, and dashes them into the dirt. He is battered, humiliated, wrong in the plainest possible way. He gets up. He decides that some jealous enchanter must have turned the giants into windmills at the last second to rob him of his glory, dusts himself off, and rides on, undefeated in the only place that finally matters, which is inside. Everyone has a Sancho in their ear, naming every giant a windmill, and everyone, at least once in a life, has to decide whether to charge anyway. Fourth beat, the words that hold his whole soul together. Again and again, people who knew Alonso Quixano try to call him back to his senses. "You are not a knight," they tell him. "You are a quiet gentleman, our neighbor, a reasonable man. Come home." And Quixote gives an answer that is, underneath the comedy, one of the most defiant assertions of selfhood ever written. "I know who I am, and I know that I may be not only those I have named, but all the 12 peers of France, and even all the 9 worthies." Read past the grandiosity and hear what he is really claiming. That identity is not a fact handed to you by your birth, your village, your income, or the opinions of sensible people. It is a decision. He knows perfectly well, on some level, what the neighbors see. A broke old man in dented armor. He simply refuses to let their accounting be the final word on who he is. He has chosen to be someone larger, and he lives inside that choice with such conviction that the world around him bends to make room for it. Think of everyone you admire who reinvented themselves against the label the world had already printed on them. The ones who decided who they were before anyone else agreed. That is Quixote's gift, and his danger held in a single breath. Self-authorship can be liberation, or it can be delusion, and the truth Cervantes will not let you off the hook for is that from the inside, the two can feel exactly the same. Fifth beat, the ending nobody is ready for. After 2 volumes of glorious, painful misadventure, Don Quixote comes home broken, defeated at last by a friend in disguise who has beaten him precisely in order to send him back to reality. He takes to his bed with a fever, and there, quietly, the fever burns the madness out of him. He wakes clear-eyed, sane, and utterly himself again, and it is the saddest thing in the book. Gathering his friends, he renounces everything. "I was mad, now I am in my senses. I was Don Quixote of La Mancha. I am now, as I said, Alonso Quixano the Good." He disowns the knight, disowns the quest, disowns Dulcinea and the giants, and the whole shining world he built. calls it all nonsense, makes his will, and dies. And notice how it lands on you. You would think his cure would feel like a happy ending, the loved one finally restored to reason. Instead, it feels like a death before the death, because when the dream dies, the man goes with it. Sancho, of all people, the lifelong realist, is the one who begs him at the end not to give up, to get well and ride out again. The book leaves you holding a question sharp enough to cut. Is a sanity that empties a life of all its meaning really the thing to root for? Or was the old man, charging his windmills, more alive in his madness than most of us ever managed to be in our sensible, careful, disenchanted health? So what does all of it add up to? On the surface, Don Quixote is a comic road trip. A deluded old man and his earthbound squire stumbling from one beating to the next across the plains of Spain. But underneath the laughter, Cervantes has built one seamless meditation on the deepest tension in human life, the gap between the world as it is and the world as we long for it to be. Walk back through the beats and watch it tighten. A gentle man reads himself out of the flat, ordinary world and into a grander one. He anoints an everyday farm girl as the ideal that gives his quest a soul. He charges windmills as giants, and when reality flattens him, he simply reinterprets reality and rides on. He clings, against every sensible voice, to a self he chose rather than the self he was assigned. And then, at the very last, reason returns and takes his whole world with it into the grave. Cervantes' refusal to resolve that tension is the entire point. He never lets Quixote be simply a fool to laugh at, nor simply a hero to cheer. The knight is both, always at once, ridiculous and magnificent, blind and clear-sighted, the most deluded man in Spain, and somehow the only one truly awake. That is the mirror the book holds up. We are all, every day, choosing how much of Sancho's grey accuracy and how much of Quixote's golden madness to let steer us down the road. And the book quietly insists that a life with no windmills in it at all may turn out to be the saddest life of all. Here is the one thing to carry out of this book and into your week. Do not try to be all Quixote or all Sancho. Learn instead to choose your windmills on purpose. The knight's error was never that he dreamed. It was that he charged everything, unable to tell a real giant from a turning sail, and got flattened again and again for it. Sancho's error was the mirror image. He could name every windmill correctly and never once felt the pull to fight for anything larger than his next dinner. A whole life lived at either pole is its own kind of poverty. So this week, try holding both. Keep Sancho's clear eyes, see the windmill for what it plainly is, count the cost, know the odds, and keep Quixote's fire. Decide, with those clear eyes wide open, that some one particular windmill is worth charging anyway. Not because you are fooled, but because you have chosen what your life will mean. Pick the dream, the person, the craft, the cause that is your Dulcinea, and crown it, knowing full well the cynics will call it ordinary. Then guard it. The world will send you a steady supply of sensible voices, explaining that your giant is only a windmill, and you should really come home and be reasonable. Some of them will be right, but a life in which you never once lower the lance and charge, a life of nothing but correct, disenchanted seeing, is not wisdom. It is just Alonso Quixano on his deathbed, sane at last, with nothing left to ride toward. Miguel de Cervantes spent the last years of a hard, disappointed life, building one gentle, bottomless joke that turned out to be a mirror for the whole human race. That the line between a fool and a hero, between madness and vision, between a windmill and a giant, is drawn not by the world, but by the eyes we choose to bring to it. Don Quixote rode out to make an ordinary world extraordinary, and the tragedy and the glory are the very same fact, that he could only do it by refusing to see the world as it plainly was. If this walk through Don Quixote gave you something worth keeping, subscribe. A new classic every week, faithfully, in about 20 minutes. Next time, we trade the dusty plains of La Mancha for feudal Japan and the mind of a man who reportedly never lost a duel. Miyamoto Musashi's The Book of Five Rings, a swordsman's spare, ferocious handbook on strategy, mastery, and seeing an opponent and a life exactly as it is, with no illusions at all. And tell me in the comments, what is the windmill in your own life that everyone around you calls a delusion? And are you still charging it, or did you already come home and hang up the lance? I read every reply.